The sound of shattering glass cut through Murphy's bar at 9:47 p.m. on a Friday night like a gunshot through silence. "You stupid fucking bitch!" Corporal Connor Blake's voice boomed across the crowded establishment, Budweiser streaming down his desert camo uniform in amber rivers. The small figure in the janitor's uniform seemed to shrink even smaller, trembling hands still clutching the aluminum tray that had betrayed her. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." Rachel Porter's voice barely carried over the classic rock bleeding from the jukebox. At 25, she looked even younger, maybe 21 at most, with those wide brown eyes magnified behind thick prescription glasses that had seen better days. Her uniform hung loose on her slight frame, making her appear even more fragile than her 5'3". Connor Blake rose from his booth like a mountain forming from tectonic rage, all 6 feet 2 inches of Marine Corps muscle coiling beneath the beer-soaked fabric. His squad followed suit in practiced synchronization. Lance Corporal Dylan Ross with his perpetual sneer, Private First Class Aidan Walsh, whose knuckles were already white with anticipation, Private Blake Turner still recording everything on his phone, and Corporal Ethan Mitchell, whose eyes held the cold calculation of someone who enjoyed watching things break. They formed a semicircle around Rachel, like wolves who had cornered something small and warm-blooded. "Meet your end, bitch!" Connor's massive hand shot out, grabbing Rachel's collar and lifting her clean off the polished concrete floor. The aluminum tray clattered away, its sound somehow louder than the 42 conversations that had just died throughout the bar. Rachel's feet dangled, searching for purchase that wouldn't come. Her glasses slipped down her nose as Connor pulled her close enough that she could smell the beer and rage on his breath. Murphy's bar sat exactly 2 miles from Camp Pendleton's main gate, a deliberate calculation by its founder to be close enough for convenience but far enough to avoid regular MP patrols. The establishment had witnessed its share of Marine Corps testosterone over the decades, fights that started over pool games or perceived slights or sometimes just because it was Friday and someone needed to bleed. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way the overhead lights caught the scene like a stage, or how every phone in the place seemed to rise in unison to record, or perhaps it was the man in the expensive gray suit sitting in the corner booth who hadn't looked up from his whiskey but whose entire body had shifted into something resembling alertness. Rear Admiral Mason Gray, dressed in civilian clothes that cost more than most Marines made in a month, took another measured sip of his 18-year-old Macallan. His weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes, those sharp gray eyes that had seen action in 7 different conflicts across 4 continents, tracked every movement with surgical precision. Something about the girl's stance, even while being held aloft, triggered a memory he couldn't quite place. The way her hands had instinctively moved to Connor's wrist, not clawing in panic, but finding specific points. The way her breathing remained controlled despite the situation. Details that whispered of training that had nothing to do with mopping floors. "Please," Rachel managed, her voice steady despite her position. "You're hurting me." But Connor just laughed, the sound harsh and metal-edged in the sudden quiet. Behind him, Dylan Ross was already moving closer, his Louisiana drawl thick with anticipation. "Look at this pathetic little college dropout, boys. Probably can't even afford community college, so she's here cleaning up after real Americans." The crowd watched with the fascinated horror of people witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Some recorded on their phones, already composing captions for social media. Others looked away, unwilling to intervene but unable to leave. A few of the older veterans shifted uncomfortably, remembering their own younger days and not particularly proud of the memories. But nobody moved to help. This was Murphy's after all, where the strong survived and the weak learned their place in the food chain. Connor dropped Rachel without warning. She hit the floor hard but rolled with the impact, in a way that Connor didn't notice, but Admiral Gray certainly did. Most people who get dropped from that height land in a heap. Rachel had dispersed the energy across her shoulder and come up in what looked like a stumble, but was actually a controlled recovery. She stayed on her knees though, head down, playing the victim perfectly. "Clean it up," Connor ordered, gesturing at the spreading beer puddle with his boot. "And maybe next time watch where you're going, instead of daydreaming about whatever minimum wage losers think about." Rachel reached for the bar towel tucked into her belt, but her movement was interrupted by Blake Turner stepping forward, his phone still recording. "Hold up, Connor. Make her apologize properly first. On her knees is a good start, but I think our audience wants to hear some genuine remorse." The way he said audience made it clear this was all going live on social media, probably tagged with whatever hashtags would get the most engagement. The humiliation burned across Rachel's cheeks, a pink flush visible even under the bar's amber lighting. She began wiping the floor, her movements economical and precise. Each stroke of the towel followed a pattern that suggested muscle memory, though none of the Marines recognized it as the same technique used to clear blood from a deck during combat operations. Her breathing remained steady, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. A tactical breathing pattern drilled into special operators until it became automatic under stress. "I'm sorry," Rachel said quietly, still not looking up. "It was my fault. I should have been more careful." "Damn right you should have," Aiden Walsh chimed in, moving to block her path to the bar's back area. At 5 feet 10 inches, he wasn't the biggest Marine in the place, but he had the lean, predatory build of someone who enjoyed inflicting pain efficiently. "But I don't think you're really sorry yet. Are you, sweetheart?" Before we continue this intense story of hidden warriors and devastating reveals, if you're watching from a military family or know someone who served, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We share untold stories of veterans every week, stories that deserve to be heard. Drop your location in the comments, whether you are watching from a base, a deployment, or home. Our military family spans the globe, and your support keeps these heroes' stories alive. Rachel stood slowly, the bar towel now soaked with beer. She moved toward the utility closet to get a mop, but Ethan Mitchell stepped into her path. Unlike the others who were running on alcohol and aggression, Mitchell's eyes were clear and calculating. He'd been watching her movements, and something wasn't adding up. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "you move pretty smooth for a janitor. Where'd you learn to recover from a fall like that?" "I took some self-defense classes," Rachel mumbled, trying to step around him. It wasn't technically a lie. Bud's training certainly included self-defense, just not the kind most people imagined. The community center offers them free on Tuesdays. Mitchell wasn't buying it, but before he could press further, the bar's front door chimed and Sheriff Samuel Carter walked in. 6 feet 4 inches of former Delta Force operator turned small-town law enforcement, Carter had the kind of presence that made smart people reconsider their choices. His hand rested casually on his service weapon as he surveyed the scene. 5 Marines surrounding a small janitor, phones recording, crowd watching. His expression didn't change, but his stance shifted subtly into something more ready. "Evening, gentlemen," Carter said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from having been in rooms where very bad people made very permanent decisions. "Everything all right here?" Connor straightened up, his Marine Corps training kicking in despite the alcohol. "Just a little accident, Sheriff. Girl here spilled some beer, but we're handling it." "I can see that," Carter replied dryly, his eyes taking in Rachel's position. The soaked floor, the recording phones. "Miss Porter, you okay?" The fact that he knew her name caused a ripple through the crowd. Rachel had been working at Murphy's for 3 months, always quiet, always invisible, the kind of person whose name you never bothered to learn. But Carter knew it, and the way he said it suggested more than casual familiarity. "I'm fine, Sheriff," Rachel said, finally looking up. For just a moment, Carter saw something in her eyes, a flash of something hard and trained and dangerous, before she tucked it away behind the mask of the scared civilian. "Just clumsy tonight." Carter nodded slowly, but his hand didn't leave his weapon. "Gentlemen, might be a good time to call it a night. Uber's running a special for military personnel, 20% off rides from bars near base." It wasn't a suggestion, and everyone in the bar knew it. But Connor, full of beer and bravado and the invincibility of youth, wasn't ready to back down. Not in front of his squad, not with the cameras rolling, and certainly not when he had been challenged by some small-town sheriff who probably hadn't seen real action since whatever ancient war he'd fought in. "We're not done here," Connor said, his voice dropping into something more threatening. "The lady owes us more than just an apology for ruining our night." From his corner booth, Admiral Gray set down his whiskey and stood up. Nobody noticed at first. He moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned that the most dangerous predators didn't need to announce themselves. But Joshua Allen, the 73-year-old Vietnam veteran who'd been nursing the same beer for 2 hours, saw him move and felt his old combat instincts fire for the first time in decades. Rachel was now systematically cleaning the floor, each movement precise and controlled. As she worked, her uniform sleeve rode up slightly, revealing part of a scar that ran from her wrist toward her elbow. It was the kind of scar that came from very specific types of injuries, the kind you got when shrapnel from an IED tried to open your arteries in places where medical help was hours away. Sheriff Carter saw it, and his entire demeanor changed, though he was professional enough not to show it. Dylan Ross, unfortunately, was neither professional nor observant enough to read the changing dynamics in the room. "You know what I think?" he announced to his audience, both present and digital. "I think she needs to learn about respect, about what happens when civilians disrespect the people who protect their freedom." He reached down and grabbed Rachel's shoulder, intending to pull her to her feet. The moment his hand made contact, several things happened simultaneously that would later be debated and analyzed from multiple phone videos. Rachel's hand came up and found his wrist with surgical precision. Her thumb pressed into a specific nerve cluster that existed in every human body, but that most people never knew about. Dylan's hand went numb instantly, his fingers releasing their grip as his nervous system briefly short-circuited. To everyone watching, it looked like Dylan had simply let go. But Admiral Gray saw the technique for what it was, a move taught in advanced special operations training, executed with the kind of muscle memory that only came from thousands of repetitions. Joshua Allen saw it too, his beer forgotten, as he leaned forward, suddenly very interested in the small janitor who moved like a ghost. "Sorry," Rachel said quickly, stepping back with her hands visible and empty. "You startled me. I didn't mean to." Dylan flexed his hand, confused by the lingering numbness, but unwilling to admit that this small woman had just neutralized him with a single touch. "You little bitch," he started, but Connor cut him off. "Enough playing around," Connor declared, his patience finally exhausted. He reached behind his back and produced a butterfly knife, the blade singing as it spun open in a display of manual dexterity that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so obviously threatening. "Let's make this more interesting." The bar's atmosphere changed instantly. Phones that had been recording for social media clout suddenly became potential evidence in what was about to become a much more serious situation. Several patrons headed for the exits, unwilling to be witnesses to whatever came next, but more stayed, trapped between the human fascination with violence and the moral paralysis of the bystander effect. Sheriff Carter's hand moved to his radio. "Connor, put the knife away. Now." "That's not a request." "It's just for show," Connor said, though the way he held it suggested otherwise. "Just want to see if our janitor here has any actual backbone, or if she's all apologizes and accidents." He flipped the knife in his hand, the blade catching the overhead lights as it spun. It was meant to be intimidating, a display of skill and control designed to emphasize the power dynamic between a trained Marine and a civilian janitor. But Rachel's eyes tracked the blade's movement with the kind of calm assessment that suggested she was calculating angles and distances rather than cowering in fear. Admiral Gray had seen enough. He moved through the crowd with the kind of purposeful stride that made people step aside without conscious thought. But before he could intervene, Blake Turner decided to escalate things further. "Hey, Connor, $20 says she pisses herself if you just nick her a little. Nothing serious, just enough to..." The sentence died in his throat as Rachel moved. It wasn't aggressive or violent, just a simple shift in stance that put her weight on the balls of her feet and brought her hands up in what looked like a defensive posture, but was actually something far more dangerous. For a split second, the mask slipped, and everyone in the bar glimpsed what lay beneath, something trained and lethal and absolutely unafraid. Connor saw it too, and his drunk brain struggled to process the disconnect between what he expected to see and what was actually in front of him. "What the hell are you?" Rachel caught herself, forcing her body back into the submissive posture of a frightened civilian. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted. Ethan Mitchell, the most sober and observant of the group, took a step back. "Connor, man, something's not right here." "Nothing's right about some nobody thinking she can disrespect Marines," Connor snarled. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. He lunged forward with the knife, intending to stop just short of Rachel's face, a scare tactic he'd used before to establish dominance. Rachel's response was pure instinct, drilled into muscle memory through thousands of hours of training. She didn't retreat or cower. Instead, she flowed around the attack like water around a stone, her hand coming up to guide Connor's wrist past her while her body pivoted out of the blade's path. To the untrained eye, it looked like Connor had simply missed, his drunk coordination failing him. But Admiral Gray saw the truth. She'd redirected his attack with minimal contact, using his own momentum against him. Connor stumbled past her, catching himself against the bar. When he turned around, his face was red with embarrassment and rage. "You think you're clever? Think taking some mall ninja self-defense class makes you special?" He came at her again, this time with genuine intent to harm. The knife swept toward Rachel's midsection, in an arc that would have opened her up if it connected. But Rachel's hand intercepted his wrist while her other hand found the pressure point at his elbow. The knife clattered to the floor as Connor's grip involuntarily released. Before he could process what had happened, Rachel had kicked the knife away and stepped back, her hands visible and empty once again. "Please," she said, her voice steady but with an undertone that suggested she was holding something back. "I don't want any trouble. Just let me clean up and go home." The bar was dead silent now, except for the classic rock still playing from the jukebox. Creedon's Clearwater Revival, singing about fortunate sons, the irony not lost on those paying attention. Connor stood there, flexing his numb hand, trying to understand how a janitor half his size had just disarmed him without apparent effort. Sheriff Carter moved closer, positioning himself between the Marines and Rachel. "That's enough. Connor, you just assaulted someone with a deadly weapon. You can either leave now and sleep it off, or I can arrest you and let the base commander sort it out Monday morning. Your choice." But Connor's pride wouldn't let him back down. Not with his entire squad watching, not with the story already spreading across social media. He bent down to retrieve the knife, but Rachel's foot came down on it first. Not aggressively, just a simple placement that kept it out of reach. "Leave it," she said quietly, and for the first time, there was something in her voice that made the hair on the back of Connor's neck stand up. It wasn't a request or a plea. It was a command, delivered with the kind of unconscious authority that came from having given orders in situations where following them meant the difference between living and dying. From the crowd, Joshua Allen's weathered voice cut through the tension. "That's a SEAL stance if I ever saw one." The words landed like a grenade in the middle of the bar. Everyone turned to look at the old veteran, then back at Rachel, trying to reconcile what he'd said with the small woman in the janitor's uniform. Connor laughed, but it sounded forced. "A SEAL? Her? SEALs are warriors, not—" He gestured dismissively at Rachel. "Whatever this is." "Female SEALs don't exist," Dylan added, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Everyone knows that." But Admiral Gray was moving now, approaching the group with deliberate steps. As he got closer, his eyes fixed on Rachel with an intensity that suggested recognition was dawning. "That nerve strike you just used," he said quietly. "They only teach that in advanced Siri training, level 3 and above." Rachel's eyes widened slightly, the first genuine emotional response she'd shown all night. She recognized the terminology, knew that only someone with significant special operations background would know about level 3 SEER. Her mind raced, calculating options and outcomes, but her body remained still. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice caught slightly on the lie. Connor, sensing the shift in dynamics but not understanding it, decided to double down on his aggression. "I don't care what kind of classes she's taken or what some old drunk thinks he sees. She disrespected us, and she's going to pay for it." He lunged at Rachel again, this time without the knife, just raw violence fueled by alcohol and wounded pride. His fist swept toward her face in a haymaker that had all his Marine Corps training behind it. But Rachel moved with liquid grace, her body flowing under the punch while her hand guided his momentum past her. Connor's fist connected with nothing but air, and his own force sent him stumbling into a table, scattering drinks and causing a fresh wave of chaos. "Enough!" Sheriff Carter's voice boomed across the bar. He had his weapon drawn now, not pointed at anyone, but visible enough to make his point. "Everyone stand down. Now!" But the situation had passed the point of easy resolution. Aiden Walsh was moving to flank Rachel, his approach tactical and thought out. Blake Turner was still recording, but his hands were shaking. Ethan Mitchell had picked up a beer bottle, not quite threatening with it, but holding it in a way that suggested he could. Dylan was flexing his still numb hand and looking murderous. And in the middle of it all, Rachel stood perfectly balanced, her breathing controlled, her eyes tracking all 5 threats simultaneously with the kind of situational awareness that took years to develop. The mask was slipping more with each second, revealing glimpses of something that didn't match the janitor's uniform or the service industry politeness. "Last warning," Sheriff Carter announced. "Stand down or I'm calling this in. Every MP from here to Oceanside will be here in 10 minutes. Connor wiped blood from his lip where he'd hit the table, his eyes never leaving Rachel. "This isn't over," he promised. "You think you're something special? You're nothing, just some nobody who got lucky." He moved toward her again, but this time Admiral Gray intercepted him. The Admiral's hand fell on Connor's shoulder with the weight of command authority that transcended retirement or civilian clothes. "Stand down, Marine." Connor tried to shrug him off. "Back off, old man. This isn't your—" The words died as Gray's grip tightened on specific pressure points that sent sheets of white pain through Connor's shoulder. It was the same kind of precision Rachel had displayed, but with decades more experience behind it. Connor dropped to one knee, his face contorting in pain. "I said stand down," Gray repeated, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from having commanded men in situations where disobedience meant death. "You have no idea what you're dealing with here." Rachel's tactical watch vibrated against her wrist, a specialized piece of equipment that looked like a cheap fitness tracker, but actually monitored biometrics with medical-grade precision. Her heart rate was elevated but controlled, her blood oxygen levels optimal despite the stress, her cortisol markers showing someone in a high-stress situation, but managing it with trained responses. The kind of data that would be invaluable for someone recovering from combat trauma, learning to manage PTSD symptoms in civilian situations. These devices had evolved from military combat systems designed to monitor operator health during missions. The same sensors that once tracked Navy SEALs during underwater demolition operations now helped veterans maintain their physical and mental health after returning home. The technology that had saved lives in combat zones by alerting medics to wounded operators now helped those same operators navigate the challenges of civilian life. Dylan Ross, his hand finally regaining feeling, decided to try a different approach. "Hey, if she's so tough, let's settle this fair and square. Arm wrestling, right here, right now. If she wins, we leave. If she loses, she admits she's just a fake trying to act tough." It was a trap, and everyone knew it. Dylan was the squad's arm wrestling champion, had won money in competitions around base. His forearms were thick with functional muscle, the kind that came from years of pulling triggers and climbing ropes and doing pull-ups in full combat gear. There was no way a small woman could match him in pure strength. But before Rachel could respond, bartender Ethan Cross finally decided to intervene. The former Army Ranger had been watching from behind the bar, hoping the situation would resolve itself without his involvement, but things had escalated beyond acceptable limits. "That's enough," he said, coming around the bar with a baseball bat in hand, not threatening anyone specifically, but making it clear he was done tolerating the disruption. "Marines, you've had your fun. Time to go." "Or what?" Connor asked, finally free from Admiral Gray's grip and looking for someone else to vent his frustration on. "You going to take on 5 Marines with a stick?" "No," Ethan Cross replied calmly, "but I'm going to ban you from the only decent bar within 20 miles of base. And then I'm going to call your CO, yes, I have his direct number, and explain how 5 of his Marines spent Friday night assaulting a female civilian. How do you think that's going to play out for your careers?" The threat of official consequences finally seemed to penetrate Connor's alcohol-fogged brain. But his pride wouldn't let him leave without some kind of victory. "Fine, but I want to know who she really is. Nobody moves like that without training. Nobody takes a knife away from a Marine without knowing what they're doing." He turned to Rachel, his eyes narrowing. "So, what's your story? Military brat? Daddy teach you some moves? Or are you one of those wannabes who watches too many action movies and thinks they're an operator?" Rachel remained silent, but her jaw tightened slightly. Admiral Gray watched her carefully, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in his mind. The way she moved, the tactical breathing, the precision of her defensive techniques. And now that he was closer, something familiar about her facial structure, something he'd seen before in a different context, under very different circumstances. "Answer me!" Connor shouted, his patience finally exhausted. He grabbed for Rachel's arm, intending to force some kind of response. If this story of underestimated strength resonates with you, show your support by hitting that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that true warriors don't advertise their power. Your engagement helps us reach more people with these powerful military stories that mainstream media won't tell. The contact triggered something primal in Rachel's trained responses. Her hand came up and caught Connor's wrist while her body pivoted, using his momentum to guide him past her, but Connor adapted, his Marine training kicking in as he tried to counter the throw. They grappled for a moment, and in the struggle, Connor's hand caught Rachel's uniform shirt, pulling hard. The fabric tore with a sound like ripping paper. and suddenly everything stopped. The entire left side of Rachel's shirt had torn away, revealing her left arm and shoulder. The overhead lights caught the exposed skin, and 42 people simultaneously drew in their breath. There, etched in black ink across her left shoulder, was the unmistakable image of a Navy SEAL trident. But not just any trident. This one had additional markings that most people wouldn't recognize, but that made Admiral Gray's blood run cold. Below the trident, in small, precise lettering, were the words, Team 29, Ghost Unit. 7 scars marred the skin of her arm and shoulder, each one telling a story of violence survived. There was the puckered circle of a bullet wound near her shoulder, the jagged line of shrapnel across her bicep, the surgical straightness of a knife wound along her forearm, and others that spoke of injuries that should have killed her, but somehow hadn't. The silence in the bar was absolute. Even the jukebox seemed to have paused between songs, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Connor released Rachel's shirt and stumbled backward, his face draining of color as his brain tried to process what he was seeing. "No," Dylan said, his voice barely a whisper. That can't be real. Women aren't SEALs. Ghost Unit doesn't exist." But Admiral Gray was already moving, his voice cutting through the shocked silence with parade ground authority. "Attention! All military personnel, stand at attention." The command was delivered with such force that every person in the bar with military experience automatically snapped to attention before their conscious minds could process why. 15 veterans, including Sheriff Carter and bartender Cross, stood rigid with their hands at their sides and their eyes forward. Even Connor and his squad, despite their shock and intoxication, found themselves responding to the trained reflex. Admiral Mason Gray stood before them in his civilian suit, but his bearing was pure military command. "Petty Officer First Class Rachel Porter," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent bar. "SEAL Team 6, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Unit 29, designated Ghost." The words landed like individual hammer blows. SEAL Team 6 was legendary enough. The unit that had killed bin Laden, that handled the most classified operations in the military's arsenal. But Unit 29 was something else, something most people with security clearances had only heard whispered about. The Ghost designation meant operations so classified they didn't officially exist. "Youngest woman to complete Bud's training," Admiral Gray continued, his voice now tinged with something that might have been awe. "Graduated at 18 years old, Class 352, honor woman, first female operator to complete Green Team selection. 3 silver stars, 2 bronze stars with Valor, 4 purple hearts, Operation Red Wings, 2, Operation Silent Dawn, Operation Neptune's Daughter." Each medal, each operation name, added another layer of impossibility to what they were hearing. Connor's legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees, not from pain, but from the crushing weight of realization. He had just assaulted someone who had more combat decorations than his entire platoon combined. "Syria, August 2019, Admiral Gray said, and now his voice carried personal weight. "ISIS compound, 15 kilometers outside Raqqa. 4 operators down, 6 wounded, extraction impossible. 1 operator stayed behind to hold the compound entrance against 40-plus enemy fighters while the rescue birds got in. Held that position for 47 minutes with multiple gunshot wounds. That operator saved my life and the lives of 11 other men." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle over the bar like a shroud. That operator was Petty Officer Porter. She was 22 years old. Rachel stood perfectly still, her torn shirt hanging loose, the trident tattoo fully visible now. Her face showed no emotion, but her eyes had gone hard and flat, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much and survived it all anyway. Sheriff Samuel Carter, still at attention, spoke without moving. "Ghost 6, you're Ghost 6, the one from Fallujah, 2004. Rachel's eyes flicked to him briefly. "That's classified, Sheriff." "Not anymore," Carter replied. "Not after you pulled my entire squad out of that building before it came down. 12 men alive today because you refused to leave us behind." The story was coming together now, pieces of legend and rumor coalescing into the impossible reality standing before them in a torn janitor's uniform. Ghost 6. The operator nobody had ever seen clearly, who appeared in after-action reports but never in photographs, who had saved more lives than anyone could count, but whom nobody could identify. Connor was still on his knees, his face white with shock, and what was beginning to look like genuine terror. We didn't. How could we know? You couldn't, Rachel said quietly, speaking directly to him for the first time since the revelation. That was the point. Ethan Mitchell, the smart one of the group, the one who had suspected something was off from the beginning, found his voice. Why are you here? Why are you working as a janitor in a bar? Rachel's expression softened slightly, though her stance remained military rigid. Recovery. After my last deployment, after the injuries, the Navy decided I needed time to readjust, somewhere quiet, where nobody would know who I was, where I could just be nobody for a while. But you own this bar, Admiral Gray said, and it wasn't a question. This whole thing, working as a janitor in your own establishment, it's cover. Rachel nodded slightly. Bought it through a shell company 6 months ago. I wanted to see how people really are when they think nobody's watching, how they treat people they think are beneath them. The implications of that statement hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Every interaction over the past 3 months, every dismissive comment, every casual cruelty, she'd been watching it all, cataloging it, learning about the people who came to her bar. Blake Turner, who'd been recording everything, slowly lowered his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. This is going to end my career. Assaulting a decorated SEAL on video. I'm done. Maybe, Rachel said, and there was something in her voice that might have been sympathy. Or maybe you learn from this. Maybe you become the Marine who understands that strength doesn't always look like what you expect. That the person serving your drinks or cleaning your barracks might have more combat experience than your entire chain of command. She turned to Connor, who was still on his knees, looking up at her with a mixture of fear and awe that would have been comical if the situation wasn't so serious. Get up, Marine. It was an order, delivered with the kind of quiet authority that expected immediate compliance. Connor scrambled to his feet, standing at attention despite himself. Ma'am, You're going to report to this location at 0600 Monday morning, Rachel cut him off. You and your entire squad. We're going to have a conversation about respect, about assumptions, and about what real strength looks like. After that, if you're interested, I might have some training opportunities for you. Dylan Ross, his arm still tingling from Rachel's nerve strike, couldn't help himself. Training? You're going to train us? Rachel's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. The Navy's putting together a new program, integration training for conventional forces working with special operations units. Specifically, learning to work with female operators who might not look like what you expect. I've been asked to run the West Coast program. She let that sink in for a moment before continuing. Tonight was a test, not just of you, but of the culture, of how Marines treat people they perceive as weak or inferior. You failed that test spectacularly. The question now is whether you can learn from that failure. Admiral Gray cleared his throat. Petty Officer Porter is being modest. She's not just running the program, she's designing it from the ground up. And she has full authority to select her training cadre from any branch of the military. So, Marines, I'd suggest you think very carefully about how you want to proceed from here. The revelation that their assault victim was not only a decorated SEAL, but also potentially their future instructor, was almost too much for Connor's alcohol-impaired brain to process. He swayed slightly on his feet, caught between the urge to run and the trained instinct to stand his ground. I need to make a call, Admiral Gray said, pulling out a secure phone that definitely wasn't civilian issue. Camp Pendleton's commander needs to know about this incident. There are going to be questions about how 5 Marines ended up assaulting an undercover special operations member. Wait, Connor said, panic creeping into his voice. Undercover? This was an operation. Rachel's expression gave nothing away. Everything's an operation, Marine. The question is whether you're an asset or a liability. She moved to the bar, seemingly unconcerned about her torn shirt or the exposed scars and tattoo. Ethan Cross handed her a spare Murphy's Bar t-shirt without being asked, and she pulled it on with economical movements. The simple act of changing shirts revealed more scars across her back, a roadmap of violence that made even the hardened veterans in the room wince. Ma'am, Aiden Walsh spoke up, his voice uncertain. Are we under arrest? Are we going to the brig? Sheriff Carter answered that one. That depends entirely on Petty Officer Porter. She's the victim here. If she wants to press charges, you're looking at assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy, and given her status, potentially federal charges for assaulting a federal agent. The blood drained from all 5 Marines' faces simultaneously. Federal charges meant federal prison, meant the end of their military careers, meant a lifetime of explaining why they'd attacked a Navy SEAL in a bar. But Rachel shook her head. No charges, this time. Consider it a very expensive lesson in not judging books by their covers, or warriors by their size, or capability by gender. Relief washed over the Marines' faces, but it was short-lived as Rachel continued. However, you will report to me Monday morning. You'll undergo a full psychological evaluation to determine if you're suitable for continued service. You will attend mandatory sensitivity training, and not the PowerPoint kind. The kind where you learn firsthand what it's like to be underestimated and dismissed. And if you make it through that, maybe, I'll consider you for the advanced program. What advanced program? Ethan Mitchell asked, his tactical mind already trying to angle for advantage. Rachel's smile was all teeth. The one where you learn to work with operators like me. The ones who don't look like what Hollywood tells you special forces should look like. The ones who might be 5'3" and weigh 110 pounds, but can still put you in the ground before you know you're in a fight. She paused, letting her words sink in. The future of warfare isn't just about strength and size. It's about adaptation, intelligence, and the ability to hide in plain sight. Tonight, you got a demonstration of what that looks like. The question is whether you were smart enough to learn from it. The bar had begun to return to some semblance of normalcy, though everyone was still processing what they'd witnessed. Phones were being checked, videos were being uploaded, and within hours, the story would be viral across military social media. The night when 5 Marines attacked a Navy SEAL without knowing it, and lived to regret it. Admiral Gray finished his phone call and approached Rachel. The commander wants to see you tomorrow. 0900, he's concerned about the security implications of your cover being blown. Rachel nodded. It was always going to happen eventually. At least this way, it serves a purpose. These 5, she gestured at Connor and his squad, they're going to be my test case. If I can turn them from the kind of Marines who attack civilians into the kind who can work seamlessly with unconventional operators, then the program has merit. Financial security mattered deeply to those who had served in high-risk operations. The specialized insurance coverage that Admiral Gray carried, and that Rachel undoubtedly had as well, went far beyond standard military benefits. These comprehensive policies covered everything from combat injuries to long-term care, ensuring that families remained protected even when operators couldn't disclose where they were or what they were doing. Investment advisors who specialized in military finances helped operators like Rachel transition their combat pay and special duty assignments into sustainable retirement funds through tax-advantaged strategies that accounted for the unique challenges of military service. Connor found his voice again, though it was smaller and more uncertain than before. "Ma'am, why didn't you just tell us who you were? Why let it go so far?" Rachel turned to face him fully, and for a moment, the weight of her experiences showed in her eyes. "Because for 3 months, I've been watching how you and others treat people you think don't matter. The janitor, the bartender, the nobody who's just trying to make a living. That tells me more about your character than any service record or fitness report ever could." She stepped closer to Connor, close enough that he could see the faint surgical scars along her hairline from a head-to-head injury that didn't appear in any official record. "You want to know what makes special operations special? It's not the training or the equipment or even the missions. It's the ability to see value in everyone, to recognize that the person you dismiss might be the one who saves your life. Tonight, you failed that test completely." "But we can learn," Connor said quickly, desperately. "We can do better." "Maybe," Rachel conceded. "Monday morning we'll find out. 0600. Don't be late, don't be drunk, and don't bring your egos. Bring your willingness to learn, or don't bother coming at all." She turned to address the entire bar, her voice carrying to every corner. "For those of you recording this, let me be clear. I'm not a hero. I'm not special. I'm just someone who was willing to do what needed to be done when it needed doing. There are thousands like me, men and women who serve in silence, who come home and try to build normal lives, who sit next to you in bars and restaurants and coffee shops without you ever knowing what they've done or what they've survived." Her eyes found the phone cameras still recording. "So, maybe think about that the next time you're tempted to judge someone by their appearance, or their job, or their size. Maybe the person you're about to disrespect has saved more lives than you can count. Maybe they've bled for freedoms you take for granted, or maybe they're just a human being deserving of basic respect regardless of their history. We're about to reveal something that will change everything you thought you knew. But first, if you're not subscribed yet, you're missing out on weekly stories of military justice and hidden heroes. Subscribe now and join over 500,000 veterans and supporters who never miss an upload. The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their drinks and conversations, though the energy in the bar had fundamentally changed. There was a new awareness, a recognition that anyone could be more than they seemed. Several veterans approached Rachel to shake her hand or offer a quiet word of thanks for her service. She accepted their gratitude with grace, but without enthusiasm. The way someone does when they're uncomfortable being singled out for doing what they considered their duty. Joshua Allen, the Vietnam veteran who had first recognized her stance, approached slowly. His weathered hands shook slightly as he offered her one of his challenge coins, a 1st Cavalry Division coin worn smooth by decades of carrying. "From one warrior to another," he said simply. Rachel accepted it with both hands, the gesture of respect not lost on those watching. "Thank you. I'll carry it with honor." "You already do," Joshua replied, then returned to his corner booth, his beer still untouched. Connor and his squad remained standing in a loose formation, uncertain what to do. They'd gone from being the aggressors to being completely out of their depth in a matter of minutes. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been obliterated and rebuilt from the ground up. "You're dismissed, Marines," Rachel said, though not unkindly. "Go back to base. Sober up. Think about tonight. Think about what kind of Marines you want to be. The kind who prey on the weak, or the kind who protect them. Monday morning, come with your answer." They filed out slowly, Connor last. He paused at the door, looking back at Rachel. "Ma'am, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just because of who you are, but because of what we did. It was wrong." Rachel nodded acknowledgement. "First step to learning is recognizing your mistakes, Marine. Don't waste this opportunity." After they left, the bar settled into a new rhythm. Admiral Gray returned to his corner booth, but didn't sit down. Instead, he approached Rachel one more time. "You know this changes everything. Your cover's blown. The whole point of this assignment was to give you time to recover without the pressure of being who you are." "I know," Rachel said quietly. "But maybe it's time. I can't hide forever. And if I can use what happened tonight to make things better for the next generation of female operators, then maybe it's worth it." Gray studied her for a long moment. "The Syria mission. You never got proper recognition for that. The Navy wanted to award you the Medal of Honor, but you refused." "I did what anyone would have done," Rachel said automatically. "No," Gray corrected firmly. "You did what only you could have done. 47 minutes holding that position. The drone footage, I've seen it. It should have been impossible." Rachel's expression closed off. "A lot of things should be impossible, Admiral. We do them anyway." She moved behind the bar, taking over from Ethan Cross, who surrendered the position without question. It was clear now who really ran Murphy's bar, who had always run it, even when she was pretending to be just another employee. The educational aspect of what had transpired wasn't lost on those present. Several younger civilians had gotten a crash course in military culture, in the reality of special operations, in the fact that their preconceptions about what warriors looked like were fundamentally flawed. Online, videos of the confrontation were already being shared with captions like, "You won't believe what happens when Marines attack the wrong woman," and "Navy SEAL humiliates bullies without throwing a punch." Law enforcement would review the incident, but Sheriff Carter's report would be clear: self-defense against armed aggressors, with minimal force used to neutralize the threat. The JAG office would conduct their own investigation, but the video evidence would show that Rachel had shown remarkable restraint, using only the force necessary to protect herself, despite being capable of much more. The legal education programs that many veterans pursued after service would use this incident as a case study. The intersection of military law and civilian law, the questions of proportional response and self-defense, the complications of classified identities and undercover operations. It would all be dissected in online courses designed for those transitioning from military to civilian legal careers. But for now, in Murphy's bar, life continued. Drinks were served, conversations resumed, and if people held their glasses a little more carefully to avoid spilling them, well, that was probably for the best. Rachel worked the bar with the same quiet efficiency she'd shown while mopping floors, but now people saw the economy of movement for what it was, the trained precision of someone who had learned to conserve energy for when it really mattered. Her hands moved with the same sureness whether she was pouring beer or field stripping a weapon, though only she knew that. At 11:30 p.m., a secure phone behind the bar rang. Only 3 people had that number, and they only called when it mattered. Rachel answered it without hesitation, listened for 30 seconds, then hung up. "Closing early tonight," she announced to the remaining patrons. "Everyone finish up and head out. Safe travels." There was no argument. Something in her tone suggested this wasn't negotiable. People finished their drinks, settled their tabs, and filed out into the California night. Admiral Gray was the last to leave, pausing at the door. "Operational?" he asked quietly. "Always," Rachel replied, already moving to lock up. As the last patron left and the lights dimmed in Murphy's bar, Rachel stood alone in the establishment she'd purchased as a sanctuary, but which had become something else entirely: a proving ground, a classroom, a place where assumptions went to die. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Package confirmed. Extract to position 7. She typed back a single word. "Acknowledged." Monday morning, 5 Marines would arrive expecting some kind of traditional military training. What they'd get would be something entirely different. A complete reconstruction of their understanding of warfare, of strength, of what it meant to be a warrior in the modern age. But that was Monday. Tonight, there was still work to do. The kind of work that happened in shadows, that never made the news, that kept people safe without them ever knowing they were in danger. Rachel turned off the last light and stepped out into the darkness. Somewhere out there, a target was moving, unaware that Ghost 6 was hunting. The 5 Marines thought tonight had been about them, about their education and redemption. They had no idea it had all been a cover for something much larger. The real operation was just beginning. The silence that followed Admiral Gray's revelation stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. 42 people in Murphy's bar stood frozen, their minds struggling to reconcile the small woman in the torn janitor's uniform with the impossible military record that had just been recited. The seal trident tattoo on Rachel Porter's exposed shoulder seemed to pulse under the amber bar lights. The inscription Team 29 Ghost Unit below it as clear as a death sentence. Connor Blake remained on his knees such he had dropped, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, horror, and something that might have been the first stirrings of genuine shame. The butterfly knife he'd wielded so confidently minutes ago lay forgotten on the floor, looking like the cheap intimidation tool it had always been. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. What could he possibly say that would undo the catastrophic mistake he'd just made? "Ghost 6, Sheriff Samuel Carter repeated, still standing at attention, despite not being in uniform for 15 years. His voice carried a reverence typically reserved for religious experiences. "Fallujah, November 12, 2004. Building 77 Alpha. 12 Marines pinned down. Air support impossible. Extraction failed twice. Then you appeared out of nowhere, one operator, moving like smoke through 3 floors of insurgents. You cleared a path for us, held the stairwell for 17 minutes while we evacuated our wounded." Rachel's expression remained neutral, but her eyes flicked briefly to Carter. "That operation is still classified, Sheriff." "Not the parts that matter," Carter replied. "Not the part where you took 11 rounds to your vest and kept fighting. Not the part where you carried Private Jenkins down 3 flights of stairs after your left shoulder was dislocated. Not the part where you refused medical evacuation until every one of my men was on the birds." The crowd was leaning in now, phones forgotten, drinks abandoned. This wasn't social media content anymore. This was living history, the kind of story that usually only existed in classified after-action reports and the nightmares of those who had been there. Dylan Ross found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. 11 rounds? That's... Nobody takes 11 rounds and keeps fighting. Dragonskin armor, Rachel said quietly, almost absently. Prototype at the time, classified. Saved my life, but broke 4 ribs and caused internal bleeding that nearly killed me later. Worth it to get those Marines out. Admiral Gray stepped forward, his presence commanding even in civilian clothes. "Tell them about Syria, petty officer. Tell them what Ghost Unit really means." Rachel's jaw tightened slightly, the first real emotion she'd shown beyond that carefully controlled exterior. "With respect, Admiral, that's need to know." "They need to know," Gray countered, his voice carrying decades of command authority. These Marines need to understand exactly who they just assaulted. The public needs to know that warriors come in all packages. The message needs to be clear. For a long moment, Rachel and the Admiral locked eyes in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Rachel gave an almost imperceptible nod. Ghost Unit was established in 2017, she began, her voice taking on the flat, emotionless tone of someone delivering a briefing they had rather forget. Experimental integration program for female operators in Tier 1 units. Officially, we didn't exist. Unofficially, we were solving problems that traditional units couldn't handle, situations where being underestimated was an operational advantage. She paused, seeming to weigh how much to reveal. Syria, August 2019, Raqqa region. What started as a simple intelligence-gathering operation turned into a complex hostage rescue when ISIS grabbed a diplomatic convoy, 14 American citizens, including 6 children. Traditional assault was impossible. They had the hostages separated and wired with explosives. Any obvious military approach would have triggered a massacre. Blake Turner, still recording despite everything, asked in a shaky voice, "So, what did you do?" "I walked in the front door," Rachel said simply, "dressed as an aid worker, spent 3 days inside the compound, mapping positions, identifying weaknesses, establishing trust. When the assault came, I was already inside, able to disable the explosives and protect the hostages while the team breached. 14 lives saved because nobody suspected the small woman bringing medical supplies was the biggest threat in the building." "But that's not the mission the Admiral's talking about," old-timer Joshua Allen said from his corner booth, his Vietnam veteran instincts reading between the lines. "There was another one, the one that went wrong." Rachel's expression hardened slightly. "They all go wrong, it's just a matter of degree." Admiral Gray took over the narrative. 3 weeks after the hostage rescue, Rachel's unit was tasked with extracting a compromised intelligence asset. Deep cover CIA, 10 years in country, burned by a leak in Washington. ISIS had him in a black site. Were planning a public execution to embarrass America. Rachel and her team went in to get him out. He paused, letting the weight of memory settle over his words. The intelligence was compromised. It was a trap. 40-plus fighters waiting, RPGs, belt-fed weapons, the works. The team was hit 30 seconds after insertion. 4 operators down immediately, 6 wounded, including myself. Extraction birds couldn't land under that much fire. Command wrote us off, started drafting the press release about a training accident. The bar was so quiet now that the distant sound of waves hitting the beach 2 miles away was audible through the walls. Every eye was fixed on Rachel, who stood perfectly still, her face carved from stone. Petty Officer Porter held the entrance to that compound alone for 47 minutes. Gray continued, his voice thick with emotion he was struggling to control. 47 minutes of continuous combat against overwhelming odds. She was shot 3 times, hit by shrapnel from 2 RPG strikes, and had second-degree burns on 30% of her body from a white phosphorus grenade. And she held that position until backup arrived. "That's impossible," Connor said, his voice hollow. "Nobody could—" "The drone footage exists," Gray cut him off. "Classified beyond your dreams of clearance, but it exists. I've watched it exactly once, and I'll never watch it again. Because watching someone you serve with transcend every limit of human endurance to save your life is not something you need to see twice." Rachel finally moved, rolling her left shoulder slightly, as if working out an old ache. "I did what needed to be done. Any operator would have done the same." "No," Gray said firmly. "They wouldn't have. They couldn't have. The medical board that reviewed your injuries said you should have been dead 3 times over. The only thing that kept you fighting was will, pure, refined determination not to let your teammates die." Ethan Mitchell, the tactical thinker of Connor's squad, had been doing math in his head. "You said she was 22 during that operation. That was 6 years ago. She's 25 now, which means she completed BUDS at 18, went operational immediately, and has been running Tier 1 operations for 7 years. That's not just impressive, it's unprecedented. It's necessary," Rachel corrected. "The world changed. The battlefield evolved. Enemies adapted. We had to adapt too, or accept failure. Female operators offer capabilities that male-dominated units lack. We can go places, do things, become invisible in ways that traditional forces can't. Ghost Unit proved that. My existence proves that. She turned to face Connor directly, and he flinched at the intensity in her eyes. You asked what I am, Marine. I'm what happens when the military stops caring about what warriors are supposed to look like and starts caring about what they can accomplish. I'm 5 feet 3 inches and 110 pounds of train capability wrapped in assumptions you can't see past. Ma'am, Aiden Walsh spoke up, his voice uncertain. Why are you here? Why Murphy's Bar? Why pretend to be a janitor? For the first time since the revelation, Rachel's expression softened slightly. Recovery. The Syria operation left me with injuries that required 18 months of surgery and rehabilitation. Traumatic brain injury from the phosphorus grenade, nerve damage in my left arm, PTSD that makes most people's nightmares look like pleasant dreams. The Navy gave me a choice, medical discharge with full honors or a 2-year recovery assignment somewhere quiet where I could heal without the pressure of being who I am. She gestured to the bar around them. I chose this, bought the bar through a shell company, created a cover identity, and spent 3 months learning what it's like to be nobody special. To be invisible for different reasons. To see how people really are when they think there are no consequences. And we failed that test, Connor said, the full weight of their actions finally crushing down on him. We showed you exactly the kind of Marines nobody should be. You showed me the kind of Marines you currently are, Rachel corrected. The question now is what kind you want to become. Sheriff Carter had moved closer during the conversation, his hand no longer on his weapon, but his stance still ready. The assault charges, ma'am. Do you want to press them? Every Marine in Connor's squad held their breath. Assault on a federal agent, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy. The charges would end their military careers and put them in federal prison for years. Their entire futures hung on the decision of the woman they'd just spent 20 minutes tormenting. No charges, Rachel said, causing a collective exhale of relief that was immediately cut short by her next words. But there will be consequences, and conditions. She moved to the bar, retrieving a tablet that definitely contained more than drink orders and inventory lists. Connor Blake, you have anger management issues stemming from untreated PTSD. You're going to get treatment, real treatment, not the joke the VA offers. I have a therapist in mind, someone who specializes in special operations veterans. You'll see them twice a week for 6 months minimum. Connor nodded quickly, accepting any condition that didn't involve federal prison. Dylan Ross, your ego is destroying your career. You're going to volunteer at the women's shelter on base, 100 hours minimum. You're going to learn what real strength looks like when it's used to protect rather than intimidate. Dylan swallowed hard but nodded. Aiden Walsh, your psychological evaluations show sadistic tendencies that are going to get someone killed, probably you. You're entering a behavioral modification program. Military psychologists have been wanting to study you for years. Now they get their chance. Aiden's face paled, but he knew better than to argue. Blake Turner, you're addicted to social media validation. Your phone gets locked in a signal-blocking box for the next 60 days. You're going to learn to live without external validation, to find worth in actions nobody sees or applauds. Blake's hands actually shook at the thought of 2 months without social media, but he nodded. Ethan Mitchell, you have the most potential here, but you're a coward when it comes to moral stands. You're going to be my liaison with Camp Pendleton's leadership. When you see problems, you're going to report them. When Marines act like we did tonight, you're going to intervene. You're going to be the conscience you failed to be tonight. Ethan straightened slightly. Yes, ma'am. Rachel set down the tablet and addressed all 5 of them. Additionally, all of you will report to this location Monday morning, 0600. You're going to learn what real warrior training looks like. Not the Hollywood version, not the toxic masculinity version, but the kind that produces operators who can save lives instead of just taking them. You're going to train us? Connor asked, unable to hide his surprise. I'm going to break you down and rebuild you, Rachel corrected. The same way Buds broke me down and rebuilt me. The same way every evolution in my career has broken me down and rebuilt me. Because that's how we improve. We identify our weaknesses and eliminate them. From the crowd, a woman's voice spoke up. It was Ashley Coleman, a female Marine sergeant who had been watching silently from a corner table. Ma'am, can others attend this training? Other Marines who want to learn? Rachel studied her for a moment. Are you willing to have every assumption challenged? To admit that everything you think you know about combat might be wrong? To be trained by someone half your size who could kill you 17 different ways before you knew you were in a fight? Yes, ma'am, Ashley replied immediately. After what I just saw, absolutely yes. 0600 Monday. Bring anyone who's serious about learning, but warn them, this isn't going to be fun. This isn't going to be easy. This is going to be the kind of training that makes you question everything about yourself. Admiral Gray cleared his throat, drawing attention back to himself. There's one more thing. Petty Officer Porter is being modest about her current status. She's not just on recovery leave. She's been tasked with developing a new training protocol for integrating special operations with conventional forces. Specifically, preparing traditional units to work with operators who don't fit the standard profile. He paused for effect. The program she develops here will be implemented across all branches. The Marines who train with her will become the instructors for their units. This isn't just about fixing the mistake these 5 made tonight. This is about changing military culture from the ground up. The implications of that statement rippled through the crowd. Rachel wasn't just some wounded warrior hiding out in a beach bar. She was architecting the future of military operations, using Murphy's Bar as a laboratory for revolutionary training concepts. Legal implications of the night's events would require careful documentation. The entire incident had been recorded from multiple angles, creating a comprehensive record that any JAG officer would find fascinating. The questions of self-defense, proportional response, and the complexity of undercover operations in civilian settings would be studied in military law courses for years. Online legal education programs designed for transitioning veterans would use this case as a prime example of how military and civilian law intersected in unexpected ways. Rachel's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. She glanced at it, her expression tightening slightly. I need to make a call. Don't go anywhere. She stepped outside, leaving 42 people to process what they'd just witnessed. Connor and his squad remained standing at attention, unsure if they had been dismissed. The other patrons began to murmur among themselves, the shock wearing off enough for conversation to resume. This is insane, Dylan muttered to Connor. A female SEAL who owns the bar, who's been watching us for months, who's designing training programs for the entire military? It's like something out of a movie. Movies get it wrong, Joshua Allen said, having moved closer to the Marines. Real warriors don't advertise. They don't need to prove anything. They just exist, ready when needed, invisible when not. That girl, woman, operator, whatever you want to call her, she's the real thing. And you boys just got the education of a lifetime. Sheriff Carter had relaxed his stance but remained nearby. You have no idea how lucky you are. I've seen what happens when someone like her decides not to show restraint. During a joint operation in Afghanistan, I watched her take apart 6 Taliban fighters in hand-to-hand combat. Took her less than 90 seconds. She moved like water, like smoke, like death itself. If she'd wanted, you'd all be in the hospital right now, or worse. The door opened and Rachel returned, her expression businesslike. Change of plans. We have a situation developing that requires immediate attention. Connor, your squad is going to get a preview of Monday's training. What kind of situation? Ethan asked, his tactical mind already spinning up. The kind where we stop talking about being warriors and actually become them, Rachel replied. She moved behind the bar and pulled a hidden lever. A section of the wall swung open, revealing an arsenal that would make most military units jealous. Weapons, communications gear, medical supplies, and equipment that definitely wasn't available on the civilian market. What the hell? Blake said, his phone automatically coming up to record before he remembered Rachel's earlier comments about social media addiction. Position 7, Rachel said simply. One of 18 facilities like this across the country. Forward operating bases hidden in plain sight, ready for situations that require immediate response. She pulled out tactical vests and communications gear, laying them on the bar. 15 minutes ago, a group of human traffickers grabbed 3 Navy wives from the commissary parking lot. They're being held in a warehouse in San Diego, awaiting transport to Mexico. FBI is 30 minutes out, Border Patrol is compromised, and local law enforcement doesn't have the tactical capability. That leaves us. Us? Connor said, his voice climbing. We're not trained for... You're Marines, Rachel cut him off. Act like it. Adapt, improvise, overcome. Or was that just something you chanted in boot camp? She pulled up a tactical display on a monitor that definitely hadn't been there during normal bar operations. 5 suspects, all armed, all former military discharged for various offenses. They know our tactics, our procedures, our weaknesses, which is why we're going to give them something they don't expect. Which is? Dylan asked. Me, Rachel said with a smile that was all Predator, and 5 Marines who are about to learn what special operations really means. The next 15 minutes were a crash course in unconventional warfare. Rachel equipped each Marine with gear modified for the mission. Nothing that would identify them as military, everything that would give them tactical advantage. She briefed them on the warehouse layout, the suspects' backgrounds, and most importantly, their roles in the operation. Connor, you're Overwatch. Your anger gives you focus when channeled correctly. Use it. Dylan, crowd control and extraction coordination. Your ego makes you decisive. For once, that's useful. Aiden, you're on victim protection. Time to use that violence tendency to shield rather than harm. Blake, you run communications and documentation. Your social media skills translate to tactical coordination. Ethan, you're with me on primary breach. This is happening too fast, Aiden protested. We need more planning, more... Operations happen fast, Rachel interrupted. The enemy doesn't wait for you to be ready. Those women don't have time for us to plan. We go now, or they disappear into a trafficking network that spans continents. She moved to the door, then paused. This is voluntary. Any of you can walk away right now. No shame, no consequences. But if you come with me, you're committing to something bigger than your egos, bigger than your careers serves. You're committing to being the kind of Marines who actually protect and serve. The 5 Marines exchanged glances. It was Connor who spoke for all of them. We're in, ma'am, all the way. Then gear up. We roll in 3 minutes. What happens next will give you chills, but before the final revelation, check out our next video about a female Apache pilot who saved 200 Rangers when everyone else fled. Click the link in the description or the end screen. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. They loaded into 2 unmarked vehicles that had been parked behind the bar. SUVs that looked civilian but had been modified with armor plating, run-flat tires, and engine modifications that would make street racers weep with envy. Rachel drove the lead vehicle with Connor and Ethan, while Dylan took the second with Aiden and Blake. During the 20-minute drive to San Diego, Rachel continued the briefing through encrypted comms. The trafficking ring has been operating for 18 months. They target military spouses during deployments, knowing the husbands are overseas and can't intervene. They sell them to cartels who use them as leverage against the military, threatening to hurt families unless classified information is provided. That's why FBI is involved, Ethan said, understanding dawning. This isn't just kidnapping, it's national security. Everything's national security when you dig deep enough, Rachel replied. But yes, this is bigger than 3 women. This is about sending a message that military families are off limits. The warehouse sat in an industrial district where the sodium lights created pools of orange illumination, separated by deep shadows, perfect for the kind of operation they were about to conduct. Rachel parked 2 blocks away and turned to face the Marines. Remember, these aren't random criminals. They're trained, they're experienced, and they're expecting law enforcement to follow predictable patterns. We're going to disappoint them. She pulled out a device that looked like a cell phone, but definitely wasn't. Thermal imaging shows 5 heat signatures in the main warehouse, 3 in a separate room, probably our victims. 2 vehicles ready for transport. We have maybe 10 minutes before they move. How do you know all this? Blake asked. Because I've been tracking this ring for 4 months, Rachel replied. Tonight wasn't random. Your assault on me Friday actually helped. They think I'm a perfect victim now, isolated and vulnerable. They were planning to approach me next week. The implications of that statement, that she'd been using herself as bait while pretending to be a janitor, showed a level of operational planning that none of them had encountered before. They moved through the shadows toward the warehouse, Rachel leading with the kind of confidence that came from having done this dozens of times before. She guided them through blind spots in the security cameras, around motion sensors, past guard positions that existed more in theory than practice. At the warehouse's side entrance, she held up a fist. Stop. Through their earpieces, her voice was calm and controlled. Connor, take position on the adjacent roof. You have 90 seconds. Dylan, Aiden, prepare for victim extraction on my signal. Blake, I need eyes on those vehicles. Any movement, you tell me immediately. Ethan, you're with me. Connor moved toward his overwatch position, his movements surprisingly quiet for someone his size. The anger that usually simmered just beneath his surface had transformed into focused intensity. He found a perfect vantage point and settled in, his rifle tracking potential threats with newfound precision. In position, he whispered. Rachel produced a lockpick set and worked the door with surgical precision. It opened silently, revealing a corridor lit by harsh fluorescence. Somewhere deeper in the building, they could hear voices, male laughter, female crying. Remember, Rachel whispered to Ethan, violence is a tool, not a solution. We want them alive to interrogate, but damaged is acceptable. They moved through the warehouse like ghosts, Rachel leading with Ethan covering. Her movement was unlike anything he'd been taught in Marine combat training. Fluid, efficient, using shadows and angles in ways that seemed to bend physics. She wasn't just moving through the space, she was becoming part of it. They reached the main floor where 5 men stood around a table covered with documents, weapons, and what looked like military-dependent ID cards. The 3 women were visible through a doorway, zip-tied to chairs, gagged, but conscious. Rachel pulled out a small device and showed it to Ethan, a flashbang modified with something extra. When this goes off, close your eyes and cover your ears. Count to 3, then move. I'll handle the main threats. You secure the victims. 5 against 1, Ethan whispered. Even for you. Watch and learn, Marine. She pulled the pin and tossed the device into the room. The explosion of light and sound was accompanied by something else. A high-frequency pulse that didn't just disorient, but actually caused momentary paralysis in anyone not prepared for it. Classified technology that definitely wasn't supposed to exist outside military labs. Rachel moved before the echo faded. She flowed into the room like liquid death, striking with precision that was almost beautiful in its efficiency. The first man went down to a throat strike that left him gasping but alive. The second took a knee to his solar plexus that folded him in half. The third managed to reach for his weapon before Rachel's hand found the nerve cluster at the base of his skull, dropping him into unconsciousness. The fourth and fifth, recovering faster than expected, actually managed to draw their weapons. Connor's voice crackled through the comms. No shot, you're in my line of fire. Not needed, Rachel replied calmly, even as she moved. She grabbed the fourth man's wrist, using his own momentum to direct his gun away while her foot swept his legs. He went down hard, his head striking the concrete with a sound that suggested he wouldn't be getting up soon. The fifth man, seeing his companions destroyed in less than 10 seconds, made the smart choice and dropped his weapon, raising his hands in surrender. Clear, Rachel announced. Ethan, victims. Dylan, Aiden, extract now. Blake, any movement? Negative on vehicle movement, Blake reported, his voice tight with adrenaline. But I've got local PD approaching, maybe 3 minutes out. Copy, everyone move. Ethan had reached the women, cutting their restraints and removing gags. It's okay, we're here to help. Marines, we're getting you out. One of the women, despite her ordeal, managed to ask, Where's your uniform? It's complicated, Ethan replied, helping her to her feet. Can you walk? Dylan and Aiden appeared, immediately moving to assist with the victims. Their usual swagger was gone, replaced by professional focus. Aiden, who Rachel had identified as having violent tendencies, was surprisingly gentle with the traumatized women, his large frame providing comfort rather than threat. Exfil now, Rachel ordered. Connor, maintain overwatch until we're clear. They moved quickly but carefully, supporting the victims who were shaky but mobile. Rachel zip-tied the conscious suspects and administered something from a small vial to the unconscious ones, a sedative that would keep them down until FBI arrived. Why not kill them? Dylan asked as they moved toward the vehicles. They're traffickers. They deserve it. Death is easy, Rachel replied. Living with consequences is harder. They'll face federal charges, spend decades in prison, and every day they'll remember that they were taken down by 1 woman and 5 Marines who barely knew what they were doing. They loaded the victims into the vehicles just as sirens became audible in the distance. Rachel made a quick call on her encrypted phone. Package secured, 3 souls safe, 5 subjects ready for pickup, position 7 out. The drive back to Murphy's bar was subdued. The 3 rescued women sat in shock, slowly processing their salvation. One of them, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 22, kept staring at Rachel. You're not really Marines, are you? She finally asked. You're something else, something more. We're whatever we need to be, Rachel replied. Tonight, we needed to be your rescue. Tomorrow, who knows? Back at the bar, FBI agents were already waiting. They took custody of the victims with the kind of professional efficiency that suggested this wasn't their first handoff from Position 7. The women would be debriefed, reunited with families, and their testimonies would help dismantle a trafficking network that had terrorized military families for over a year. After the FBI left, Rachel gathered the 5 Marines in the now empty bar. They looked different than they had 3 hours ago. Older, more serious, carrying themselves with the weight of having done something real. "You did well," she said simply. "Not perfect, but well. Connor, your overwatch was textbook. Dylan, you coordinated extraction flawlessly. Aiden, you protected those victims like they were your own family. Blake, your communication kept us all connected and aware. Ethan, you adapted to my operational tempo better than some trained operators." "It felt different," Connor said slowly, trying to articulate something he didn't fully understand. "Different from combat deployments, more purposeful?" "Because it was pure," Rachel explained. "No politics, no unclear objectives, no collateral damage, just a simple mission. Save innocents from predators. That's what special operations should be when we do it right." She moved to the bar and poured 6 shots of whiskey. Good stuff, not the rotgut most bars serve to Marines. "To those we saved tonight, and to those we'll save tomorrow." They drank in silence, each processing the night's events in their own way. Finally, Blake asked the question they were all thinking: what are we now? We're not regular Marines anymore, but we're not special operations. So, what are we? Rachel smiled, the expression transforming her face from warrior to something almost approachable. "You're evolved. You're Marines who understand that warfare isn't just about strength and aggression. It's about intelligence, adaptation, and knowing when not to fight. You're the bridge between conventional forces and special operations. You're the future." She pulled out 5 small devices from behind the bar, military-grade encrypted phones. "These are yours now. They only have one number programmed: mine. When I call, you answer. When I need support, you provide it. In exchange, I'll teach you things that aren't in any manual, show you capabilities you didn't know existed, and help you become the Marines you should have been from the start." "Why us?" Ethan asked. "After what we did Friday night, why give us this chance?" Rachel's expression grew thoughtful. "Because you represent everything wrong with military culture. The toxic masculinity, the bullying, the assumption that might makes right. If I can transform you 5 into something better, then maybe we can transform the entire system. You're my proof of concept." She paused, then added, "Plus, you owe me for Friday night. This is how you pay that debt, by becoming better." Connor stood up straighter. "We won't let you down, ma'am." "You will," Rachel said matter-of-factly. "You'll fail, you'll regress, you'll make mistakes. That's human. The question is whether you'll learn from those failures or let them define you." Her phone buzzed with another encrypted message. She read it, her expression darkening slightly. "Speaking of learning opportunities, we have a problem. The trafficking ring we just hit, it was connected to something bigger. Someone in Camp Pendleton has been feeding them information about deployment schedules, family locations, security vulnerabilities. A Marine is helping traffickers target Marine families?" Dylan's voice was incredulous and furious in equal measure. "That's what we're going to find out," Rachel replied. "But not tonight. Tonight, you go back to base. You tell no one what happened here. You maintain your covers as the same Marines you were Friday night. But starting Monday, your real training begins." She handed each of them a card with an address, not Murphy's bar, but a location on base none of them recognized. 0600, don't be late, don't be drunk, and don't bring your egos. Bring your willingness to learn. As they prepared to leave, Connor turned back. "Ma'am, one question. Your tattoo, Team 29, Ghost Unit, how many others are there? How many female SEALs that nobody knows about?" Rachel's smile was enigmatic. "Enough to change everything, not enough to do it alone. That's why we need Marines like you could become, force multipliers who understand that strength comes in all forms." The 5 Marines left Murphy's bar, different than they'd entered it 3 hours earlier. They'd arrived as bullies who'd assaulted what they thought was a helpless victim. They were leaving as provisional members of something unprecedented, a hybrid unit that existed in the spaces between conventional and special operations, between visible and invisible, between what the military admitted to and what actually kept America safe. Over the next 6 months, those 5 Marines would undergo transformation that would become legend in military circles. Connor would master his anger, channeling it into protective fury that saved dozens of lives. Dylan would lose his ego and find purpose, becoming an instructor who taught humility alongside tactics. Aiden would confront his violent nature and redirect it, becoming a counselor for veterans struggling with similar demons. Blake would abandon social media entirely, finding validation in silent service that no one would ever know about. And Ethan would find his courage, becoming the moral compass for an entire battalion. But that was the future. Tonight, Rachel stood alone in her bar, the weight of command settling on her shoulders like an old, familiar burden. Her phone showed 17 more messages, each representing a crisis that needed addressing, a threat that needed neutralizing, an innocent that needed protecting. She poured herself another shot of whiskey, but didn't drink it, just stared at the amber liquid that reflected the bar's lights like captured fire. The physical scars from Syria still ached when the weather changed. The mental scars from 100 operations in places that didn't officially exist would never fully heal. But that was the price of being what she was. A ghost who protected the living. A warrior who fought from shadows. A woman who'd proven that strength had nothing to do with size or gender. Her reflection in the mirror behind the bar showed the truth that most people would never see. Not the small janitor, not the wounded veteran, not even the decorated SEAL. It showed someone who'd chosen to stand between darkness and light, to be the barrier that evil couldn't cross, to transform poison into medicine by taking the worst of military culture and alchemizing it into something noble. The encrypted phone rang. Another crisis, another mission, another chance to prove that the best warriors were the ones you never saw coming. She answered it without hesitation. Position 7 operational, Ghost 6 standing by. The voice on the other end delivered coordinates, objectives, parameters. Another trafficking ring, but this one was taking children. Military children from base schools, kids whose parents were deployed and couldn't protect them. Rachel's expression hardened into something that would have terrified anyone who saw it. Children were the red line. Touch military kids, and you summon something worse than death. You summoned Ghost 6 with a team of reformed Marines who had something to prove. She sent a message to 5 encrypted phones. Position 7, 30 minutes, lethal force authorized. All 5 responded within seconds. Roger, en route. The transformation was already beginning. 5 Marines who had started the weekend as bullies were about to become something else entirely. Protectors, warriors, the sword and shield that stood between innocence and evil. Rachel closed Murphy's bar and descended to Position 7's armory. This time, she wouldn't hold back. This time, the traffickers would learn why Ghost Unit existed, why female operators were the military's best-kept secret, why underestimating someone based on appearance was the last mistake you ever made. The night was just beginning, and somewhere in the darkness, predators were hunting military children. They had no idea that they'd just become the prey. Ghost 6 was hunting, and this time, she wasn't alone. The story that began with 5 Marines attacking a female Navy SEAL in a bar would end with those same Marines helping her dismantle a trafficking network that reached into the highest levels of military command. It would become a classified legend, whispered in special operations circles, about the night toxic masculinity died and something better was born from its ashes. But the real story, the one that mattered, was simpler. Sometimes the smallest person in the room was the deadliest. Sometimes the victim was actually the predator. Sometimes the janitor mopping your floors had saved more lives than you could count. And sometimes, just sometimes, the worst night of your life became the first night of who you were meant to be. The lights of Murphy's bar went dark, but Position 7 blazed with activity. 5 Marines and 1 SEAL prepared for war. Not the kind fought on foreign battlefields with clear enemies and defined objectives, but the shadow war fought in American streets against enemies who looked like neighbors, who preyed on military families, who thought themselves untouchable. They were about to learn otherwise. Because Rachel Porter, 5 feet 3 inches of refined lethality, had just activated something new in the American military arsenal, a unit that didn't officially exist, composed of operators who shouldn't work together, targeting threats that nobody wanted to admit were real. Ghost Unit was no longer solo. It had just become something more dangerous. It had become a pack, and packs protected their own. The real war was just beginning.